I officially welcome you today to the Hartman Value Profile with a colleague of mine, Ryan Leonard, who is, as you will know when he starts talking, he is an expert in this field. And he has a lot of stories to tell us about how it can help you and help you understand yourself, but be a leadership tool for you. So, Ryan, take it over.
Absolutely. Welcome, my dear friends. It's so good to be here with you all today. Thank you, Karla, for the chance to come out and speak and offer tips, tools, any insights to help us all engage in leadership development. Really is what a lot of things that we're all involved in, engaged in.
Right.
So my name is Ryan Leonard, and I'm a leadership psychologist. You know, the old saying is that the two most important days in a person's life is when they're born and when they find out why. And I was put on this
Good
earth.
Question. Yeah,
right. I was put on this earth to build stronger families and communities as a result of my skills, love, and ability to build leaders. Because leaders lead in the communities, they lead in their families and in the business world. So I've given my life and to that very cause of leadership development.
Yeah, and Ryan, remember too that they don't have to have a title to be leader.
Absolutely. That's one of the first things I'll ask people in some of my group breakouts is what's the difference between a leader and a manager, right? You don't need to have a title to lead. It's all about influence. The influence to change those around you. That's the textbook research definition. So one of the tools that I utilize to this end is the Hartman Value Profile. For years, right? Probably at least 75 years in the business and psychological world. A lot of times when I ask people which ones they've used, a couple of key ones will usually surface. One of those ones is IQ test, right? So looking at rational intelligence. Another one is the emotional balance type test. These are your MMPIs. These are mostly for emotional dysfunctions that psychologists use in doing therapy or things along those lines. Most often, the third tier is what I hear from my business clients when I'm consulting. And that's more your personality inventories. So this is your Myers-Briggs. This is your DISC, which Karla is an expert in. And we have paired very well with the Hartman using these two assessments together. And these are used to look at character traits that, you know, somebody might be best suited for a certain job or leadership position, things like that. So there are a ton of assessments out there, and they do a lot of different things. There are some overlaps with some of the assessments. But with all these in mind, there is a unique assessment that I want to introduce, and that would be the Hartman Value Profile. Many people ask, what makes the Hartman unique? Why this assessment among all these other assessments? So my answer to that usually has about 3 or 4 different responses. The first one is that the Hartman is based in axiology, which sounds really cool, right? Like axiology, but it's actually a scientific field relating to the study of values, similar to sociology, social work, psychology, right? So the Hartman is based in a rigorously researched field. So that would be one. The second one is that it measures a person's value structure and hence their judgment decisions, which within certain contexts. This is vital, okay? Because your value system defines who you are. It is the lens through which you view the world, formulate choices, and make decisions. Okay. So for example, this is what I like to use with people when I'm explaining the Hartman. The more somebody values fitness and being healthy, the higher the predictability of them ordering a healthy meal when they eat out at a restaurant. So the key point here is that we put energy and effort into the areas that we value most as a part of our value structure. The higher the value in an area, the more energy we allocate towards it, and the more it impacts our behavior and decisions. So when combined with competency assessments or other assessments that we have discussed, the Hartman enhances the picture that we see to get a more accurate perspective of those that we are selecting, developing, or in this case, for this webinar today, keeping our high performers. Okay, so there is a simple formula that I would like to transition to. And that formula, let's pull that up as our next slide. Thank you for getting those up, Karla. Appreciate it.
I apologize.
No, you're
right close to each other. And
didn't skip a beat, sister. Didn't skip a beat. All right. So here's the formula. Okay. Skill set plus good judgment equals excellent outcomes, right? Is what we look at when we're using the Hartman. So skill set's pretty easy to measure. As far as looking at competency assessments, prior job performances, degrees, certifications, right? Lots of things that will give us a good pulse on a person's skill set for a job or a position. Now, measuring good judgment is much more rare and difficult to capture. Okay, and this is where the Hartman steps in to give us this picture. And this is why it's so impactful, y'all. Because a person's value structure and judgment will determine how those skill sets will be utilized in their context. Okay, I want to hit that one more time. The Hartman is impactful because it determines that person's value structure and how those skill sets will be utilized at different levels. Okay, so that is unique and hugely impactful. So I want to spend just a few minutes on some of the statistics behind the Hartman. Okay, now I do not claim to be a statistician, right? I had to practice that word actually in graduate school, so that way it kind of rolls off the tongue a little smoother. Right. But I do see and respect as a psychologist the validity and statistical significance of instruments that we are using to develop our leaders, to select our leaders, to implement in this context, implement interventions to keep our high performers, to lower turnover. Okay.
And it's quite amazing, Ryan. It's quite amazing. It's quite amazing how accurate they are. It's like, how do they know all that?
It is that's a webinar all of itself, with all the correlations between everything. The Hartman has been said by some to be the most mathematically accurate assessment that they have seen. That's from some of our Hartman training from some of our companies. I've got lots of research. I've got a composium with 25 different scholarly research approaches that tested the Hartman in all kinds of different facets, and pulled out its validity and all these things. And here are actually some of those statistics from those research. Yeah. So we know the Hartman is a statistically significant predictor at a 0.05 level of significance in predicting a person's overall performance level. Okay. And that was a meta-analysis, which means that you are able to apply that to multiple different jobs, right? So overall performance. The ability to work well with others also is a statistically significant predictor of that. Thirdly, strategic decision-making ability. Okay, the Hartman was able to statistically predict a person's strategic decision ability. Now, I want to pause. Those three indicators, any one of those to focus on, to lean into, to develop would be impactful for an organization, let alone one assessment that hits all three, right? There is rich power in that. Now, the other ones, those are just on there to show that, yes, the Hartman is valid, it's reliable, and it's got concurrent validity as well. So I want to toss out one more number, if I may. And this number, a lot of zeros, okay? A quadrillion to be exact. Since the Hartman measures a person's sense of good judgment in over 70 areas, there are 12.8 quadrillion possible mathematical outcomes that one person's results can have. That's greater than all the people who have ever lived on the earth.
Yeah, wow.
Now, people, right? Whoa, people are like, oh, that's a lot of zeros. But,
I don't think I've ever heard a quadrillion.
Right, me neither. I had to type that in, am I spelling this correctly?
Yeah, right. Do I have enough zeros? Did you count them out?
So, but here's how that translates for us. What that means is that person's results are are deep, they're rich, and they're custom to that person. And with that comes loads of depth and insights into that person. Okay. So with all these case studies, with all the research and the numbers backing this, I can see why companies and my clients in multiple industries like to use the Hartman as a tool, among others. But why do people like using the Hartman? Okay, for me, that's a very important question, probably even the most important question. With focus, intentionality, coaching, and hard work, we see scores strengthen over time. Okay, this is not a permanent tattoo. It does not put you in a box and define your identity. It doesn't define who you are. Mm-hmm. Because these scores can strengthen, and because the Hartman measures work indicators and self-side personal indicators, as we strengthen these scores, that means that people are living more fulfilled lives because they're strengthening their work side and their personal self side. And who we are drives what we do. Okay, I've seen incredible people with strong work capabilities, but their self side was in such a space that they didn't have the energy to actualize on those work capabilities. Right. So we had interventions for our executive coaching contracts around stress management, self-care, things like that, so they can actualize and be the leaders that they want to be. So that's kind of a little introduction to the Hartman, going through the statistics, why the Hartman is unique, things along those lines. I have other stories and things like that, but for the sake of time, I'll go ahead and move on to the actual indicators that we look at with the Hartman. So the first one is the meaningfulness of work. Okay, this shows up on the self side of the Hartman report. And for our time together today, we're looking at turnover and quiet, and under the umbrella of quiet quitting. Mm-hmm. I heard a joke that I have to share. I chuckled just a little bit. I heard this just yesterday on the radio. So the joke was that there's a Gallup reported that 6 out of 10 people are quiet quitting. Mm-hmm. The other 4 work for Gallup. I couldn't help but chuckle at some of that and the nuances there. But we know, whether that's a joke or not, like we know the reality is that retention, quiet quitting, and the war for talent and retaining talent is in full swing. Okay, you're not going to have your top performing organizations performing to their capabilities if they don't have the top talent to drive that forward, right? So as I consult with organizations, that this is one request that I will usually get from them, is to help with retention, specifically keeping some of their high performers from leaving. We know a term, some of us will know the term backdoor attrition, okay? And that is when your good people, your high performers, for whatever reason, are slipping out the back door of the organization to go work elsewhere, whether that is because they're not engaged, their work isn't meaningful, or their role satisfaction isn't there. There are many areas of the Hartman that we can look at, but for our window of time today, we've got about 15 minutes left. I could go on for hours, but just with the few minutes that we have, we'll look at 2 of the key indicators around engagement and satisfaction. Specifically here, the first one is meaningfulness of work, and the second one is role satisfaction. All right, so with the meaningfulness of work, this indicator measures the degree of person's meaningfulness a person's primary work has for them and their identity. Okay, so, and by meaningfulness, we could also look at that from the terms, basically means job satisfaction, to the extent that our work is fulfilling and enjoyable. Now, there are some people on this call that have taken the Hartman, and their profile would look somewhat like this. The red arrow on the right is the actual indicator that we're talking about, okay, meaningfulness of work. The preferred range that we want to see this fall within is the 0 to 14 range. Closest to 0 is strongest with the Hartman. So you think about it like golf. You want lower scores, right? Lower scores equal stronger. So this person on this example, their score here for their meaningfulness of work came in at an 11. So they fall within that preferred range. They're the second tier, meaning that they're well developed between 8 to 14 on their indicator. Here are some strengths that come with the Hartman on that score, okay? So somebody who scores well there, first off, those that score strong here on this indicator will strive more diligently and for a longer period of time to make a poor work environment more satisfying and fulfilling. Consequently, you have to watch that because that could also lead to higher levels of stress and faster burnout if they're not careful. Okay. Mm-hmm. So usually somebody that scores in the range of 0 to 10, work is very meaningful for them. It brings them high levels of joy. They wake up with the pep in the step, ready to charge the day, right? The second tier, the 11 to mid-teens is usually what we'll say. Work is adequately meaningful for them. They like it. They recognize the need for balance, work-life balance. But they're looking forward to when Monday comes around. They're pretty happy to hop in and get working on Monday. And then the farther that scale goes from 0, the weaker it gets. Okay, so looking at the high 20s, low 30s, meaning that work is really not that meaningful for them for whatever reason. Now again, I have seen scores strengthen and weaken. Right, this is kind of a sliding scale. It's a snapshot in time of where we are. So leadership implications for this. They've got some good ones in here.
Ryan, can we tell everyone that you're probably that highest one?
Yes, right? Karla, yes. I am, man, I love what I do. So I am definitely within that 0 to 10.
Yeah.
However, there have been times in my career when I was a regional executive in the healthcare field where I was probably more towards the mid 20s. Yeah. Where I got to the point where stress from COVID, we all have our COVID horror stories, right? Mm-hmm. Being in the healthcare industry, specializing in hospice. Mm-hmm. During COVID, it was, work got brutal. Wow. So we really me and my team used this assessment heavily with my team at the time to actually, and that's a great point to bring up, Karla, we use this to actually set interventions to help work retain that meaningfulness, to keep that engagement. So, but yeah, right now, totally in that 0 to 10. Life's great, work is great.
Yeah.
So with this indicator, many executives are interested in just this indicator. What they'll do is they'll have me come in and we'll assess different work units, across the company, because there is usually a correlation here with the stronger this scale is, right, per group. There's usually a correlation with strong performance outcomes for that group. And that shouldn't be anything surprising, right? Usually we all know that higher levels of work engagement lead to higher levels of productivity and outcome, right? But this is that scale that also correlates with that. Typically good leaders are intentionally creating an environment for others that is fulfilling and meaningful in some way. So what we'll look at an aggregate score. So the average of a group of people who are working underneath the manager. And if that group falls within the 0 to mid-teens range, what that tells us is we've got a manager that's doing a pretty good job of creating a really good work environment that is meaningful for their direct reports. Which building a meaningful work environment has huge implications for employee engagement, morale, turnover, keeping those high performers, right? So there's a lot of really good optics and angles we could look at just on that scale with the Hartman. All right, Karla, let me pause here before I hop into the next the next one. Any questions that you have burning right now, my friend?
No, I just think it's fascinating how you can make that correlation to work, and especially that factor that they're on that 28 where they're not really, into the work. Then that is an indication that, boy, I need to get a hold of this person and find out why. Yes. Because it may be that their assignment, they don't like it right then, or it may be something trivial, or
absolutely,
or maybe it's over my head, and I need a little help here. So yeah, that's a great scale to look at.
Yeah, no, totally agree, my friend. Great insights. Okay, so that's our first scale. So there's about 30, right? 30 plus. that we can kind of look at and measure, but that's one of the key ones. The second one, which I find so fascinating, is the balance. It's a balance indicator that looks at a person's self-concept and role satisfaction. So when we're talking about this one, what we're talking about is a person's degree of satisfaction and fulfillment that a person currently has in the roles they are pursuing in life. Now, what we mean here, those roles could be manager, clinician, supervisor, spouse, parent, right? Lots of different roles. So this indicator, because the roles that are measured are both work and personal, okay, just an emphasis on this one is that this indicator will usually lean towards our job roles, because that is primarily what many of us use for our role identification, right? We tend to identify ourselves more with our work roles than life roles. So when we see this move, it's usually related to our work roles. With this one, we are looking, so since it's a balance indicator, right? So we want the ideal range for this. So if you have your report, you can see that the red arrow, it's the fifth indicator down from the top, okay? Balance with self-concept. And so this example actually scored right in the ideal range, okay? You want closer to 0. +5, so if you start swinging too hard to the right, okay, and you start getting plus too far out there, that's a challenge. If you start swinging to the left, that is also a challenge, but a different challenge. So when somebody is at a 0 for this one, what that means is that they have a healthy level of satisfaction and fulfillment in their work and personal life roles at this time. So really quick, as a side note, when somebody starts leaning to the right on this, then that person is putting too much emphasis on positions and titles and work roles as a part of their identity, which can generate a larger than life sense of self-importance that they bring to the work role. The problem with that is two things. One, if they lose their job, they lose their identity, and that has devastating impacts. Yeah. Two, it could give them blinders, where they feel so important that they don't see their deficiencies, whether it's in leadership role or performance role. And then they have what we call derailment, which is involuntary cessation of performance, right? Or promotion, okay? They derail because they think they're so great and they don't see some areas that they could, some blind spots, okay? But to our conversation, sorry, go ahead, Karla.
I was saying, not me.
Not you. Your scores were great, sister. Your scores were so good. So for our conversation today, talking about retention, keeping our high performers, what happens is when that indicator starts swinging to the negative side, okay? So we are undervaluing our roles, right? What happens there is that shows an indication of insufficient role satisfaction, which is usually caused by work and other roles not being big enough or rewarding enough for a person in terms of meaningfulness and purposefulness. Mm-hmm. So usually when we start swinging to that 10-5 negative on this indicator, a person may feel underutilized or underappreciated. Possibly, one thing that could be happening here is that there could be underemployment occurring, where an individual may be ready for a new challenge or in need of a new and different job. This is one that we look at it shows up on our engagement and retention reports that we run for the Hartman. This shows up on our promotion readiness type reports and stuff that we do when we're assessing leadership benches to kind of outline succession planning. If we have a high performer that is low on this, and that means that they're ready for a bigger scope because their current role isn't giving them enough satisfaction or meaning. So this has great implications. If a high performer, so looking at turnover and helping to retain our high performers, right? We don't want to see backdoor attrition. If a high performer is dipping here, like I said, it could be time for a bigger scope or responsibility. This is a key to addressing backdoor turnover, where good people are leaving and you don't want them to. Quick illustration. I know we've got just a few minutes left, but quick illustration. I had the owner of a large sporting goods company bring me in, and he said he contracted with me to come and work with the CEO. And he said, our business is thriving. Our team is great. I'm worried about my CEO. There's that disturbance in the force, right? To quote some Star Wars going on. So I did the Hartman, and I walked in at our second meeting after I had a relationship built with him. And I said, Brad, how is your resume updating going? And have you had any job offerings? And he just goes white. His face just drops. And he said, only my wife knows that I'm actively searching for a job. He said, how did you know that? This indicator and his meaningfulness of work indicator started swinging to the weak side, indicating that he wasn't finding meaningfulness in his work, so he wasn't engaged, and his role satisfaction was dipping. So we have some great conversations around designing interventions for him. So what happens then is this tool, so to kind of wrap things up, armed with this information, leaders and managers across industries can assess their teams, look at the meaningfulness that they find within their job engagement, look at role satisfaction, and then that gives you a platform to have incredible, deep, custom personal interventions and coaching around a person's individual indicators that will strengthen both of those scores. Then you work towards implementing those interventions as a way to help keep your high performers, okay? To help those who are engaged get even more engaged, right? Lots of different options here, but the Hartman does an incredible job of bringing so much of a unique lens to the equation as another data point. So this has been helpful in retaining top performers and increasing overall organizational performance with my clients. And it's a tool that I love heavily and have seen some incredible impacts from. So with just the few questions that we have left, I'll go ahead and toss it over to Karla for any key questions that you might have.
I think you've just done a fabulous job of designing this, of telling us how important it is and how it fits together with leadership and how you can understand the team. I guess my question would be, do you give this to leaders and teams together so that they have a discussion? Does that ever happen, or is this more on a one-on-one basis?
Yeah, no, great question, Karla. I've done it both ways, depending on the contracts with the clients and what they want. There is a powerful conversation to be had when you assess a leader and their team. So usually what I will do is I will assess a leader and team, and then they'll bring me out to do a full team debrief, and I'll speak to averages. I can speak to the team averages in a more safe environment, right? Mm-hmm. Or I'm not saying, oh, dude, this guy's scores were really bad. This guy's were really good, right? Like, I don't want to do that. But I can speak to averages, and we can have a good conversation around how we as a team can help increase the averages that we're seeing within these scores. And then from there, we can have really good team breakouts, team conversations, and I can do deeper dives on an individual, confidential coaching type basis, and be more intentional with the manager on structuring specific interventions for their employees.
I have found that when I do the DISC and they all come together, so that then they share, where they are on these scales. And at first they're kind of like, I don't know if I want to share. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is me.
Yes.
And so in a team building situation, assessments like this are absolutely fabulous, because people start to understand that you have strengths and you have limitations, and we start to accept each other as human beings.
Exactly. Yep.
So, well, I think we're at the end, and would just like to tell everyone that I thank Ryan for coming, and I have a feeling we're going to have you back.
It would be my honor and pleasure.
Here. So thank you so much. And in your in the chat, you did put how they can get a hold of you, right?
Yes. In the chat is my LinkedIn profile. You can send me a message, and also has my cell phone and my work email. Actually, I'm going to put my email in there as well.
Oh, I do have a question here, Ryan, from one of the participants. Monica says, you may not be able to give specifics, but what might be needed if you have someone whose strength is in the 28 to 23 range?
Sure. Now, there are a lot of things that can factor into that. That gives us a good foundation, like a foundation to have a conversation around why that person individually may feel that their work doesn't have meaning for them. And from that, maybe sometimes it could be because the tasks they're doing, maybe other indicators will show that they are very people oriented, and the tasks they're doing are all process, right? They're checking boxes and just clicking away, right? So the people side, that muscle isn't being flexed. And if we could lean into that, and then that might be helpful. I see that a lot with managers where they want to be with their people more, but they're constantly pulled into the task side.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
What we can delegate out, right? And then how we can identify what is meaningful to them and lean into that, right? And then it's hardwiring that usually with a coaching type agreement going forward. The DISC is helpful for that because it really pulls out some great insights as far as don't do, like, I like to do this and I don't like to do that, right?
Right.
So you go through some of those areas on the DISC for an employee as well.
Yeah, excellent. It's been a fabulous session with you. And I would just like to add one thing for these managers that have people that they think are disengaged. One of the things is just thank them.
Yes.
Thank them for what they're doing. If they're a people person and they're doing process, thank them for the process.
Yes.
I think that they'll be happier.
Yep. And that role satisfaction, it's, feeling underfulfilled, but also underappreciated.
Right.
So that's spot on, Karla. That's a big deal. Usually a ratio of 9-1, right? Criticism versus compliments is kind of what will help fend off a toxic culture.
Okay, I know you got a lot out of this. We'll have Ryan back for another session, and I know that you have to get back to work. So our time has expired, and I want to thank you all for coming, and be sure and contact Ryan with his email up there. So thank you all, and goodbye, and we'll talk later.